I'm Sabrina, 36, a pediatric nurse practitioner with a life I fought hard to build. My son Jake is 20 now, thriving at Stanford on a full scholarship studying biomedical engineering. We've been a team, just the two of us, for his entire life. Most days I'm amazed at how far we've come. But yesterday I received certified mail that shattered my peaceful existence. After 20 years of complete silence, my parents are suing me for grandparent rights to my son. The same people who threw me out like garbage when I needed them most now want to claim my greatest achievement as their own. If you're watching this from somewhere, you've rebuilt your life after people gave up on you. Drop a comment below and hit subscribe. Let me share how I went from homeless and pregnant at 16 to fighting off the very people who abandoned us. Growing up in Westbrook, Connecticut, my childhood looked perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial house sat on a tree-lined street in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods. My father, Thomas Whitfield, was a cardiothoracic surgeon at Mercy Hospital, renowned throughout the Northeast for his skilled hands and innovative techniques. Everyone in town knew him, respected him, and my mother made sure we all knew how lucky we were to bear his name. My mother, Eleanor, embodied everything a surgeon's wife should be. She served on countless charity boards, hosted fundraising galas, and volunteered at the hospital auxiliary. Her appearance was always immaculate, from her highlighted blonde hair to her tailored outfits and pearls. She managed our household with the same precision my father used in the operating room, expecting nothing less than perfection from her children. "Appearances matter, Sabrina," she would remind me constantly. "People are always watching the Whitfield family." And we were watched. Our neighbors, my parents' colleagues, our church congregation, they all looked at us as the model family. My father's success, my mother's community involvement, and their two well-behaved daughters were evidence of a life well lived. At least that's what everyone thought. My older sister Amelia played her role perfectly. 4 years older than me, she was valedictorian, captain of the debate team, and president of the National Honor Society. She got accepted to Princeton early decision and went on to medical school just like our father wanted. My parents beamed with pride at her every achievement. Then there was me. I wasn't rebellious, not in the beginning anyway. I maintained a 3.8 GPA, played violin in the school orchestra, and ran track. But it was never enough. If I brought home an A, my father would ask why it wasn't an A+. If I placed second in a track meet, my mother would suggest more practice rather than congratulate me. "The Whitfields aren't second-place people, Sabrina," my father would say sternly. "Mediocrity is for those without our advantages." What they didn't know, or rather what they chose to ignore, was my passion for art. I'd spend hours in my room drawing and painting, creating worlds where I could breathe freely without judgment. When I showed my mother a sketch I was particularly proud of in 7th grade, she glanced at it and handed it back. "That's nice, dear, but you should be studying for your biology test. Art is a hobby, not a future." After that, I kept my art hidden, tucked away in portfolios under my bed. It became my secret refuge, the only place where I felt truly myself. My best friend Diana was the only person who understood. We'd been inseparable since 3rd grade, and her house became my sanctuary. Her parents, Bill and Marta, owned a local bookstore and embraced creativity. Their home was cluttered and warm with mismatched furniture and walls covered in art, nothing like the pristine showroom feeling of my house. "Your parents are so intense," Diana would say after witnessing one of my mother's lectures about proper behavior. "Don't they ever just chill?" "That's not in the Whitfield vocabulary," I joke, but it hurt knowing my family operated on conditional love, while Diana's parents accepted her completely. Sophomore year started with me determined to finally earn my parents' approval. I'd mapped out the perfect schedule: AP classes, volunteer work at my father's hospital, and track team. Maybe if I checked all their boxes, they'd finally see me. What I didn't know was that this year would change everything, and the perfect family facade my parents had built would crumble because of me. Marcus Jackson transferred to our school the second week of sophomore year. I first noticed him in my art class. While I was competent with my drawings, Marcus was extraordinary. His charcoal sketches seemed to breathe with life. Mrs. Lawson, our art teacher, couldn't hide her excitement at having such a talented student. "He's been accepted to summer programs at RISD. Diana whispered to me as we watched him work. Apparently, he's already sold some of his work. I was intrigued, but assumed he'd be arrogant about his talent. I was wrong. When Mrs. Lawson paired us for a project on mixed media portraits, I discovered Marcus was quiet, thoughtful, and surprisingly humble. Your line work is really good, he told me after seeing my sketchbook. Have you ever thought about applying to art schools? I laughed. My father would have a coronary. The Whitfield plan is pre-med law, or at least business. Marcus nodded understanding immediately. Parents and their plans. My mom wants me to be an engineer. Stable job, good benefits. I get it, but I can't imagine doing anything but art. Over the next few weeks, we spent hours working on our project, often staying after school in the art room. I learned that Marcus lived with his single mother, Tracy, in a small apartment across town. She worked as a nurse's aide during the day and waited tables at night to support them. Despite having so little, Marcus spoke of her with immense respect. She works so hard for me to have opportunities, he explained. That's why I feel guilty sometimes about wanting art instead of something practical. But she tells me to follow my talent even when she's worried about it. The contrast between his mother's support, despite their financial struggles, and my parents' rigid expectations, despite our privilege, wasn't lost on me. Our friendship deepened through the fall. We started meeting in the library during lunch, sharing our sketchbooks and dreams. Marcus wanted to create graphic novels and murals. I shared my secret desire to illustrate children's books or work in animation. You should apply to the Summer Arts Institute, he suggested one day. The deadline's next month. I applied last year and it changed everything for me. My parents would never let me go, I said, but Marcus persisted. Just apply. See if you get in first, then figure out the rest. For the first time, I started imagining a future different from my parents' blueprint. Marcus made me feel like my dreams weren't childish fantasies, but legitimate aspirations. By November, our friendship had evolved into something more. We started texting constantly and finding reasons to touch each other's hands during art class. One afternoon, while working late on our project, Marcus leaned over and kissed me. It was my first real kiss, and it felt like all the colors in my artwork suddenly made sense. We started dating secretly. I told my parents I was studying with Diana or staying late for track practice when I was really with Marcus. We'd go to the small art gallery downtown, or sit in the park sketching together, or sometimes just walk through neighborhoods looking at houses and imagining our futures. With Marcus, I felt understood and accepted completely. My confidence grew, and I even submitted my portfolio to the Summer Arts Institute with his encouragement. My parents noticed the change in me. My mother commented that I seemed happier, and my father was pleased when my grades improved in the first semester. Whatever you're doing, keep it up, he said over dinner one night. This is the focus I've been waiting to see. Little did they know that my improved mood and performance came from finally feeling valued for who I truly was, not who they wanted me to be. When the acceptance letter from the Summer Arts Institute arrived in February, I was ecstatic and terrified. I showed it to Marcus first, who spun me around in celebration in the art room. I knew you'd get in. This is huge, Sabrina. That evening, bolstered by my acceptance, I cautiously mentioned the program to my parents during dinner. It's very selective, I said nervously. Only 40 students from the entire Northeast got in. What would you do with an art program? My father asked, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. It could be good for college applications, I suggested. Demonstrates well-rounded interests. My mother shook her head. Wouldn't your time be better spent volunteering at your father's hospital? That would be much more impressive to medical schools. But what if I don't want to go to medical school? The words slipped out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. My father carefully set down his fork. Sabrina, art is a nice hobby, but it's not a career for someone with your background and opportunities. This summer program is out of the question. The matter was closed. I didn't mention it again, but something shifted inside me. For the first time, I was truly angry at my parents for dismissing my dreams so easily. Marcus and I grew closer through this disappointment. Our relationship became more serious, and in late March we were intimate for the first time. It happened at his apartment when his mother was working a double shift. We were nervous but certain about our feelings for each other. What we weren't certain about was the future. My period, usually as regular as my mother's social calendar, was 2 weeks late in April. After a third week passed, I bought a pregnancy test at a pharmacy in the next town over. I took it in the girls' bathroom at school with Diana standing guard outside. 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately. I was 16 and pregnant. The perfect Whitfield family image was about to shatter, and I had no idea just how completely my life was about to change. The bathroom stall felt like it was closing in on me as I stared at those 2 pink lines. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the test. "Sabrina, are you okay in there?" Diana called softly through the door. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up and I could barely breathe. This couldn't be happening. Not to me, not to the daughter of Dr. Thomas Whitfield, pregnant at 16, in sophomore year. When I finally emerged, Diana took one look at my face and pulled me into a tight hug. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. "Whatever you decide to do, I'm here." I spent the rest of the school day in a fog. Teachers called on me, and I somehow answered. Friends chatted with me between classes, and I nodded at appropriate moments. But inside, I was screaming. After school, I found Marcus waiting by my locker. One look at my face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I couldn't say it aloud, not in the crowded hallway. I pulled him into an empty classroom and showed him the test I'd kept in my backpack. His face went pale, but to his credit, he didn't run. He didn't accuse me. He just pulled me close and held me while I finally broke down. "I'm so scared," I sobbed against his shoulder. "Me too," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But we'll handle this together. Whatever you want to do, I'm with you." The next few days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and internet searches. We discussed all the options huddled together in the back corner of the library, or sitting in his car parked by the lake. "My mom had me at 17, Marcus said. "It was hard, but she managed. If you want to keep the baby, I'll get more hours at the grocery store. I can still finish school. We can make it work." His determination should have comforted me, but all I could think about was my parents' reaction. They would be furious, disgusted, disappointed. Everything I feared. For 3 weeks, I kept the secret, trying to gather courage, and hoping the problem would somehow magically disappear. I started wearing looser clothes, though there was nothing to show yet. I made excuses to skip family dinners, claiming study sessions, and track practice. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. Mother's Day was approaching, and my parents always made a big deal of the holiday, with a formal brunch at the country club. There would be no escaping that. As the date grew closer, I realized it would be the moment to tell them. Somehow the irony of revealing my pregnancy on Mother's Day seemed fitting. The morning of the brunch, I stood in my bedroom staring at my reflection. I wore a pale blue dress my mother had selected with a cardigan to match. I looked every bit the perfect Whitfield daughter on the outside, while inside I carried a secret that would destroy that image forever. At the country club, my father ordered champagne for the table, even allowing Amelia and me a small glass each for the toast. "To the most elegant and devoted mother a family could ask for," he said, raising his glass to my mother, who smiled graciously. I set my champagne down untouched. My mother noticed immediately. "Sabrina, it's a special occasion. One sip won't hurt." "I can't," I said, my voice barely audible. "What do you mean you can't?" my father asked, irritation creeping into his tone. The moment had arrived sooner than I planned. With my sister and parents staring at me across starched white tablecloths and crystal glasses, I took a deep breath. "I can't drink because I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. My mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. My father's face drained of all color, then rapidly turned crimson. Amelia's eyes widened in shock. "This is not the place for your inappropriate jokes, Sabrina," my mother hissed, her eyes darting around to see if anyone had overheard. "It's not a joke," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm about 7 weeks pregnant." My father set his glass down with such force that champagne splashed onto the tablecloth. Without a word, he signaled for the check. The drive home was silent and suffocating. I sat in the back seat next to Amelia, who wouldn't look at me. My mother stared straight ahead, her posture rigid. My father's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. When we arrived home, my father said in a voice of deadly calm, "Your mother's study, now." I followed my parents into the room while Amelia disappeared upstairs. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded like a jail cell locking. "Who is the father?" My father didn't waste time with preamble. His name is Marcus Jackson. He's in my art class. Jackson, not Bill Jackson's son. My mother looked confused. No, his mother is Tracy Jackson. She's a nurse's aide and waitress. The contempt on my mother's face was immediate. Oh, Sabrina, how could you be so stupid? Do you have any idea what this will do to our family's reputation? I'm scared and I need your help, I said, tears beginning to form. We didn't mean for this to happen. My father paced the study, his doctor's composure completely gone. This is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. You are 16 years old with your entire future ahead of you. The Whitfield name means something in this community. I know, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to need your support. Marcus and I have talked, and he's going to stand by me. He's getting more hours at his job, and maybe I could take some classes online until after the baby comes, and then… Stop. My father held up his hand. There will be no baby Sabrina. This situation can be handled discreetly. I'll make a call to a colleague in New York tomorrow. What? I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to have an abortion? It's the only sensible option, my mother said, as if we were discussing which color to repaint the guest room. You're too young to ruin your life over one mistake. But what if I don't want an abortion? The idea had crossed my mind during those 3 weeks of secrecy, but facing the actual decision, I realized I couldn't do it. What if I want to keep my baby? My father's face hardened. Then you are not the daughter we raised. No child of mine would throw away their education and future for a teenage pregnancy, especially with a boy from that background. That's not fair. You don't even know Marcus. I know enough, my father said dismissively. This is what's going to happen. You will have the procedure, then spend the summer at Aunt Catherine's in Vermont. You can return for junior year, and no one ever needs to know about this unfortunate incident. I stood up suddenly, finding strength I didn't know I had. No, I'm keeping my baby. My mother gasped as if I'd slapped her. My father stared at me like I was a stranger who had invaded his home. If that's your decision, he said finally, his voice ice cold, then you are no longer welcome in this house. I thought he was bluffing. Parents don't throw their children out over mistakes, no matter how serious. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw no love, no concern for my well-being, only rage at the damage to his precious reputation. Thomas, surely we can't just… My mother began, showing the first flicker of uncertainty. If she's old enough to get pregnant and defy our wishes, she's old enough to face the consequences. He cut her off. I will not have a pregnant teenager under my roof bringing shame to this family. You have 1 hour to pack your things. He continued, looking at his watch as if timing a surgical procedure. Take what you can carry. Anything left behind will be donated. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, reality crashing down on me. That's not my concern. You've made your choice. Now you get to live with it. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend how quickly my world had collapsed. The clock is ticking, Sabrina, my father said, opening the study door. 59 minutes left. I ran upstairs to my bedroom, tears blurring my vision. This couldn't be happening. Surely they would calm down, reconsider. But deep down, I knew my father never reversed his decisions. I grabbed my backpack and emptied it of school books, then began stuffing it with clothes. I took a duffel bag from my closet and filled it with more clothes, my sketchbooks, toiletries, and the small amount of cash I had saved. What does a 16-year-old pack when being thrown out? I had no idea. As I frantically moved around my room, I heard a soft knock at my door. Amelia stood there, her face pale. Is it true? Are you really pregnant? She asked. I nodded, wiping tears with my sleeve. Will you help me talk to Dad? She looked down at the carpet. You know how he is when he's made up his mind. I can't believe you're doing this, Sabrina. Think about what it means for all of us. What about what it means for me? I cried. I'm your sister. You should have thought about that before, she said quietly, then turned and walked back to her room, closing the door firmly. Abandoned by my sister, I continued packing, grabbing my phone charger, a photo album, and my favorite stuffed bear from childhood. It all seemed so surreal, like I was packing for a trip rather than being exiled from my home. The hour passed with terrifying speed. I had just zipped the duffel bag when my father appeared in the doorway. Time's up. I'll walk you to the door. I took one last look at my bedroom, the space that had been mine since I was a child. I'd never see it again. That reality hit me hard as I followed my father downstairs, struggling with my heavy bags. My mother stood by the front door, her face a mask of disappointment. She didn't offer to help, didn't move to hug me. "When you come to your senses about this situation, you can call us," she said stiffly. "And if I don't change my mind," I asked, my voice breaking. My father opened the front door. "Then you are no longer our concern or our responsibility." I stepped outside into the cool spring air. A light rain had started to fall, appropriate for the moment my life fell apart. "Dad, please," I said one last time, turning back. "Mom," but the door closed firmly, and I heard the deadbolt turn. Just like that, I was locked out of the only home I'd ever known. I stood on the porch for several minutes, hoping they would reconsider, that the door would open, and they would welcome me back with apologies. It didn't happen. With nowhere else to go, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called Diana. As I walked away from my house carrying everything I owned in 2 bags, the full weight of my parents' rejection crushed down on me. I was 16, pregnant, and homeless, and not once during that horrible hour had either of my parents asked how I was feeling or if I was okay. They had thrown away their daughter to preserve their image, and not a single call or message would come from them in the days that followed, confirming that their decision was permanent and absolute. "Of course you can stay with us," Diana said when I arrived at her doorstep, soaking wet from the rain. Her parents looked concerned but welcomed me inside. "Just for a few days," I assured them, not wanting to be a burden. "Until I figure things out." Those few days stretched into 2 weeks. Diana's parents, Bill and Marta, were kind, but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I overheard them whispering one night after they thought I was asleep. "We can't keep a pregnant teenager indefinitely," Bill said. "What about calling child services?" "She's terrified of being put into foster care," Marta replied. "And can you imagine what that would do to the Whitfield's reputation? Thomas would never forgive us." "So we just let her stay until she has the baby. That could be 7 more months." Their concern was valid. Their small house was already crowded with 4 people, and I was sleeping on a pull-out couch in their living room. I decided to call Marcus the next morning. "My mom said you can stay with us," he told me after I explained that I needed to leave Diana's. "It's not much, but there's the couch." Tracy Jackson lived with Marcus in a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. The living room barely fit a couch and TV, and the kitchen was a narrow galley with just enough room for a small table. But when I arrived with my bags, Tracy hugged me tight. "We'll make this work, honey," she said, though I could see the worry in her eyes. "Marcus told me everything. You're not alone." Living with the Jacksons was a stark contrast to my privileged upbringing. Tracy worked 12-hour shifts most days, leaving early and returning late. Marcus took on extra hours at the grocery store while still trying to keep up with school. I found myself alone in their tiny apartment for long stretches, too ashamed to return to school, where everyone would eventually learn about my situation. After a week, I made the painful decision to officially drop out. The school counselor tried to talk me out of it. "There are programs for students in your situation," she explained. "You could take some classes online, return after the baby is born." But I couldn't face the whispers, the stares, the inevitable questions about why I no longer lived at home. So at 16, not even halfway through sophomore year, my education came to an abrupt halt. With Tracy's help, I found a job waitressing at the diner where she worked nights. The owner, Frank, was a gruff but fair man who didn't ask too many questions when Tracy vouched for me. I lied about my age, claiming I was 18, and he either believed me or chose not to verify. The work was exhausting. I'd never had a job before, and spending 8 hours on my feet carrying heavy trays made me appreciate how sheltered my life had been. My hands cracked from hot water and harsh cleaning chemicals, my back ached constantly, and morning sickness made the smell of food nauseating. But I was earning money, contributing to the tiny household that had taken me in, when my own family threw me away. Every dollar I made went into a jar for the baby, a visual reminder of why I had to keep going. My first prenatal appointment was a harsh dose of reality. The free clinic waiting room was crowded with women in various stages of pregnancy, many looking as young and scared as I felt. When my name was called, I went in alone. The doctor was efficient but kind, confirming I was about 10 weeks pregnant and healthy despite the stress. "Do you have support at home?" she asked, noticing no one had accompanied me. "Yes," I lied, not wanting to explain my complicated living situation. She gave me pamphlets about pregnancy nutrition and warning signs to watch, for then scheduled my next appointment. As I walked out, clutching the black and white ultrasound image, the enormity of what lay ahead hit me. In less than 7 months, I would be responsible for a human life when I could barely take care of myself. Word travels fast in small towns. Within weeks, people knew I was no longer living at home. My parents had created a story that I'd gone to live with an aunt to focus on my studies at a more rigorous school. But as my pregnancy became visible, that lie couldn't hold. The whispers followed me at the grocery store, the pharmacy, everywhere I went in town. Former friends from school stopped texting. Neighbors who had known me my entire life crossed the street to avoid conversation. I was experiencing firsthand how quickly someone could become a social outcast. One rainy afternoon, about 2 months after moving in with the Jacksons, I was arranging napkin dispensers at the diner when a familiar voice called my name. "Sabrina, I thought that was you." Mrs. Lawson, my art teacher, stood at the counter looking both surprised and concerned. I instinctively put a hand over my now visible baby bump. "What are you doing working here? Your parents said you transferred schools." The kindness in her eyes broke through my carefully constructed composure. Before I could stop myself, the whole story poured out right there between the sugar caddies and ketchup bottles. Mrs. Lawson listened without judgment, her expression growing more troubled as I explained how my parents had disowned me, how I dropped out of school, how I was living on a couch in a tiny apartment. "Sabrina, why didn't you come to me?" she asked when I finished. "I could have helped. I was ashamed," I admitted. "Everyone thinks I'm this huge disappointment." "You made a difficult choice, but that doesn't define your whole future," she said firmly. "And you shouldn't have to give up on your education or your art." The next day, Mrs. Lawson returned with a woman named Gina Martinez, a social worker who specialized in teen parent cases. While Mrs. Lawson went to talk to Frank about giving me a break, Gina sat me down in a booth. "There are programs designed specifically for situations like yours," she explained. "Housing assistance, continuing education, prenatal care, parenting classes. You have options beyond struggling alone." For the first time since that Mother's Day brunch, I felt a flicker of hope. Gina helped me apply for a subsidized apartment in a complex for low-income families, enrolled me in a program to earn my GED, and connected me with proper prenatal care through state insurance. By my 7th month, I had moved into a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much, just a main room with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a closet. But it was mine. Marcus helped me move in, carrying the secondhand furniture we'd found at thrift stores and yard sales. "It's really coming together," he said as we assembled a crib donated by a church charity. He was trying so hard to be the supportive boyfriend and father-to-be, but I could see the strain in his eyes. At 17, he was working nearly full-time while trying to maintain his grades. His art, once his passion, had been set aside for more pressing concerns. His mother worried constantly about our situation. "You kids have no idea how hard this is going to be," she warned us. "A baby changes everything." But despite her concerns, Tracy was our biggest supporter, picking up extra shifts to help with expenses and teaching me basic baby care using a borrowed doll from her hospital. Between waitressing shifts, I studied for my GED, determined not to let my education end at sophomore year. Gina had helped me create a plan: get my GED before the baby came, then take community college courses once the baby was a bit older. "Your life isn't over," she reminded me. "It's just taking a different path than you expected." 2 weeks before my due date, I woke in the middle of the night to a sharp pain and wet sheets. My water had broken early. Terrified, I called Marcus, who rushed over with his mother. Tracy took one look at me and knew we needed to get to the hospital immediately. "First babies usually take their time, but not always," she said, helping me into their car. The labor was long and difficult. 16 hours of pain, unlike anything I could have imagined. Marcus stayed by my side, holding my hand and looking increasingly pale as my contractions intensified. Tracy used her hospital connections to check on me between her own patients, offering encouragement and advocating for me when the medical staff seemed dismissive of a teenage mother. But it was a nurse named Rhonda who truly became my angel that day. She had the morning shift and stayed 2 hours past her time to see me through. "You're doing great, sweetheart," she kept saying. "Your little one is almost here." When they placed my son on my chest at 6:43 the next evening, the world shifted on its axis. He was tiny but perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that when they briefly opened seemed to look right into my soul. "What's his name?" Rhonda asked as she helped me position him for his first feeding. "Jake," I said softly. "Jake Marcus Whitfield." I had kept my family name a last connection to the identity I once had, though I would later question that decision. As I held my son in that hospital room with only Marcus Tracy and a kind nurse present, instead of the loving family I should have had, I realized my life would never be the same. But looking at Jake's perfect face, I couldn't regret the decision that had cost me everything else. The first year of Jake's life was the hardest of mine. Nothing had prepared me for the bone-deep exhaustion of caring for a newborn while trying to support us financially. He was colicky for the first 3 months, crying for hours each evening, no matter what I did to comfort him. I'd pace my tiny apartment, bouncing and shushing him, while tears streamed down my own face. Marcus tried his best to help coming over after school and work to take Jake so I could shower or sleep for an hour, but the strain was showing on both of us. He was constantly tired, his grades were slipping, and our relationship was suffering. "You never want to talk about anything but the baby," he said during one of our increasingly frequent arguments. "It's like you don't even see me anymore." "Because all I do is work and take care of him," I snapped back. "When exactly am I supposed to focus on anything else? Our teenage romance, once so important, it seemed worth sacrificing everything for, was crumbling under the weight of adult responsibilities." Marcus had started mentioning parties with his school friends' events I couldn't attend with a baby. I pretended not to mind, but each time he chose his friends over us, a little piece of my heart broke. Despite the challenges, I was determined to continue my education. When Jake was 4 months old, I passed my GED exam with scores high enough to qualify for a small scholarship at the community college. I felt a surge of pride holding that certificate, proof that I hadn't completely abandoned my future. Balancing studying with motherhood and work seemed impossible at first. I'd read textbooks with Jake sleeping on my chest, write papers during his naps, and flash note cards while feeding him. The diner manager let me switch to night shifts, so Marcus could watch Jake while I worked from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. I'd come home exhausted, take over baby duty at 7 a.m. when Marcus left for school, and catch broken sleep when Jake napped. Rhonda, the nurse who had helped deliver Jake, became an unexpected ally. She lived in my apartment complex and often stopped by to check on us. "You remind me of myself," she told me one evening as she expertly calmed Jake during one of his crying jags. "I had my daughter at 17. Her father left before she was born." "How did you manage?" I asked, desperate for reassurance that survival was possible. "One day at a time," she said simply. "And I became a nurse, which let me support us both. Have you thought about what you want to do long term?" I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead, too consumed with immediate needs. But Rhonda's question planted a seed. She began bringing nursing textbooks when she visited, telling me about the program she'd completed and the stability her career provided. "The hours can be tough with a child," she admitted. "But the pay is good, there's always demand, and you'd be great at it. You're already more compassionate and responsible than half the nurses I work with." Her encouragement led me to research nursing programs at the community college. The practical 2-year route to an RN degree seemed like a realistic goal I could work toward while raising Jake. When Jake was 8 months old, a turning point came that would reshape our future. Marcus had been accepted to the state university on an art scholarship, a dream opportunity he'd applied for before. Our lives changed so dramatically. "I don't have to go," he said, as we sat on my worn couch after Jake was finally asleep. "I can keep working at the grocery store, take classes at community college with you." But I could see the hope in his eyes, the yearning for the life he'd imagined before I got pregnant. Keeping him here would mean watching that light slowly die, replaced by resentment. "You should go," I said, forcing a smile, though my heart was breaking. It's an amazing opportunity. We'll figure out visits and you can send whatever money you can spare. Are you sure? What about Jake? His relief was evident despite his concern. Jake and I will be fine. We always are. It was a painful decision for both of us, but deep down I knew it was right. Marcus deserved a chance at his dreams, even if it meant ours would take different paths. He left for college that fall with promises to call every day and visit every weekend. The first few weeks he kept those promises. He'd return on Friday evenings, spend time with Jake, help with late-night feedings. But gradually the visits became every other weekend, then once a month. The daily calls shortened, became less frequent. I understood. He was experiencing college life, making friends, enjoying the freedom I no longer had. I tried not to be bitter when he talked about parties or art shows or new friends. I tried to share his excitement when his work was selected for the student gallery. But the distance between us grew not just physically, but emotionally. We were living such different lives now, his expanding while mine seemed to contract around the walls of my small apartment and the boundaries of motherhood. 3 months into his first semester, Marcus called on a Wednesday night unusual for our new routine. I knew before he spoke what was coming. "I've met someone," he said, his voice a mixture of guilt and excitement. "Her name is Amanda. She's in my drawing class." Though I'd sensed it coming, the words still felt like a physical blow. "I see." "I didn't plan this, Sabrina. It just happened. We've been spending a lot of time together working on projects and she doesn't come with a baby and all the complications." I finished for him. "That's not fair," he protested, but we both knew it was true. After we hung up, I cried silently while Jake slept peacefully in his crib, unaware that his family had just shrunk even smaller. I didn't blame Marcus, not really. We were both so young, and the weight of parenthood had fallen primarily on me. But the abandonment stung, reopening the wounds left by my parents' rejection. Just when I thought things couldn't get harder, Jake got sick. What started as a simple cold rapidly developed into pneumonia. His tiny body burned with fever, and his labored breathing sent me rushing to the emergency room in the middle of the night. "His oxygen levels are concerning," the doctor said, attaching monitors to my screaming baby. "We need to admit him." For 3 terrifying days, I didn't leave Jake's hospital room, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair by his crib, desperate for each small improvement. No one came to spell me, so I could shower or eat a proper meal. No grandparents arrived with concerns and offers of help. No father rushed back from college to support us. It was just me, a 17-year-old single mother making medical decisions and providing the only comfort my son had in the world. On the second night, as Jake finally slept peacefully with improved oxygen levels, I broke down. A kind night nurse found me sobbing in the bathroom. "It's not supposed to be this hard," I told her through tears. "I'm not supposed to be doing this alone." "But you are doing it," she reminded me gently. "And you're doing it well. That little boy is lucky to have a mother who fights for him so fiercely." When we left the hospital, something had fundamentally changed in me. The last threads of girlhood had been cut away, replaced by a steely determination born of necessity. My parents had disowned me, Marcus had moved on, but Jake had no one but me. I was truly on my own now, but I was no longer afraid. If I could get through this, I could get through anything. Jake and I would build our own family, small but unbreakable. I would become everything he needed, even if it meant setting aside my own needs and dreams for now. As I carried my recovering baby back to our tiny apartment, I made a silent promise to both of us. This was not the end of our story, but the difficult beginning. Someday, things would be better. I would make sure of it no matter what it took. 4 years passed in a blur of exhaustion, determination, and gradual progress. By the time Jake started kindergarten, our lives had found a sustainable rhythm. I had completed my CNA certification and was working at the same hospital where Rhonda was a nurse, making better money with more consistent hours than the diner had provided. With steady income and Jake in school, I enrolled in the community college nursing program. The financial aid office helped me secure grants and scholarships that covered most of my tuition, and my status as a single parent qualified me for additional assistance. Our support system, though small, was solid. Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, watched Jake after school until I got home from work or class. She taught him Spanish and made sure he ate vegetables, treating him like the grandson she rarely got to see in Mexico. "He is such a good boy," she would tell me. "So smart, so kind. You are doing a wonderful job, Sabrina." Her validation meant everything to me during those years when doubt constantly crept in. Was I giving Jake enough? Was he missing out because of our circumstances? Would he resent me someday for the father who had faded from his life, sending birthday cards with $20 bills but rarely visiting Gina? The social worker who had helped me find housing still checked in regularly. She had become a mentor, helping me navigate the complex systems of assistance programs and encouraging me when the juggling act seemed impossible. "You've already overcome the hardest part," she reminded me. "Every step now is building towards stability." And Rhonda had become not just a friend, but a professional mentor. She advised me on classes, helped me study for exams, and advocated for me to get clinical rotations that worked with my parenting schedule. My nursing program was grueling. Clinical rotations often started at 6 a.m., requiring me to drop Jake at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment before dawn. Classes and study groups ate up evenings and weekends. There were times I'd find myself reading textbooks at the playground, glancing up periodically to make sure Jake was still safely climbing or sliding. "Mommy, why do you always have to study?" he asked once, his little face serious. "Because I'm learning to be a nurse so I can help people like Rhonda does," I explained, "and so we can have a better life together." "When you're a nurse, will we live in a house with a backyard?" he asked, revealing how much he noticed our circumstances. "That's the plan, buddy," I promised, hugging him close. "Just a few more years." Jake was thriving despite our challenges. He had started kindergarten reading above grade level, quickly becoming a teacher favorite. His natural curiosity and intelligence reminded me painfully of my father, though I never said this aloud. As Jake grew, his questions about our family became more specific and harder to answer. "Why don't I have a daddy like Michael does?" he asked after a play date with a classmate. "Your daddy lives far away," I explained. "He's an artist and he has to work in another city." "But Michael's daddy works in New York and still comes home every night." "Families are all different, Jake. Some kids have a mom and dad, some just have a mom like you, some just have a dad, some have two moms or two dads. What matters is that you're loved." He seemed satisfied with this answer, but I knew harder questions would come as he got older. Questions about grandparents would be even more complicated to explain. For now, I focused on creating traditions that made our little family feel complete. We had pizza movie nights every Friday. We decorated our apartment for every holiday, no matter how minor. We took photos together in the same spot on the first day of each month to document how we both changed over time. When I graduated from my nursing program, Jake sat in the audience wearing a button that read, "My mom is a nurse." Rhonda and Gina flanked him, cheering as loud as any proud parents when I walked across the stage. Mrs. Rodriguez had baked a special cake for the celebration, and Mrs. Lawson, who still kept in touch, sent a watercolor card she'd made herself. My makeshift family celebrated this milestone that had seemed impossible when I was 16 and homeless. I had done what my parents thought I couldn't, completing my education while raising a child alone. With my RN license, doors opened quickly. Hospitals were desperately hiring, and my experience as a CNA made me an attractive candidate. I accepted a position on a medical surgical floor that offered benefits and relatively stable hours. My first paycheck as a registered nurse felt monumental. After paying our bills and setting aside money for savings, I took Jake to shop for new furniture. We replaced the sagging couch and rickety dining table that had been donated years ago. Small improvements, but symbolic of our changing circumstances. "Are we rich now, Mommy?" Jake asked, as we picked out his first new bed, replacing the second-hand one he'd outgrown. "Not rich, but we're doing better," I told him honestly. "And things will keep getting better." Within a year, we moved from our subsidized studio to a small two-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood. Jake had his own room for the first time, which we painted blue at his request. Our refrigerator displayed his growing collection of perfect spelling tests and math awards. While working full-time, I began taking evening classes toward a bachelor's degree in nursing, the next step toward becoming a nurse practitioner. Jake would sit at the kitchen table doing his homework while I studied my own materials. Sometimes we'd quiz each other his spelling words, alternating with my pharmacology terms. By the time Jake was 8, he was showing remarkable aptitude for science, creating elaborate experiments in our kitchen that occasionally ended in messes, but always in learning. I encouraged his curiosity, buying him microscopes and chemistry sets when our budget allowed. "You're just like your grandfather," I said once without thinking, then froze when I realized what I'd revealed. "My grandfather. I have a grandfather." Jake's eyes lit up with excitement. I took a deep breath. "Yes, your grandfather is a doctor, but we don't see him or your grandmother anymore." "Why not? Can we visit them?" "It's complicated, buddy. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that hurt other people, and it's hard to fix things afterward." He considered this with the solemnity only a child can bring to adult problems. "Did they do something bad to you, Mom?" "They made choices I didn't agree with when I was very young and having you. But without those choices, we might not be the team we are today, right?" I pulled him into a hug, marveling at his empathy and insight. The truth was more complicated, of course. In the decade since my parents had thrown me out, I had not received a single call letter or message from them. Not when Jake was born, not when he was hospitalized, not when I graduated. As far as they were concerned, I had ceased to exist the moment I chose my child over their reputation. It hurt less now than it once had. I had built a life they couldn't imagine I was capable of proving their lack of faith in me wrong with each passing year. When Jake won the state science fair at age 10 with a project on bacterial resistance, I thought briefly of my father, the doctor, and how proud he would be of his grandson's scientific mind if he allowed himself to know it existed. But these moments of reflection had become rarer. I was too busy moving forward to look back often. We were not just surviving anymore, but beginning to thrive. I completed my BSN when Jake was 11 and immediately enrolled in a nurse practitioner program. My hospital offered tuition assistance in exchange for a commitment to work there after graduation. The year Jake turned 12, I made a down payment on a small 3-bedroom house. It wasn't in the prestigious neighborhood where I grew up, but it had a yard for Jake to play in and enough space for us to finally breathe. The day we moved in, he ran from room to room in excitement, claiming the biggest bedroom after mine for himself. "Can I paint it any color I want?" he asked. "Within reason." I laughed. "No black walls, please." "Can we get a dog now that we have a yard?" We adopted a rescue mutt the following weekend, completing our little family. As I watched Jake play fetch with Cooper in our backyard, I thought about how far we'd come from that rainy day when I stood on my parents' porch with everything I owned in 2 bags. The journey had been harder than I could have imagined, but looking at my son's joyful face, I knew I'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. The family we created might be unconventional, but it was built on unshakable love rather than appearances and expectations. In my most difficult moments, I had promised myself and Jake that things would get better. Against all odds, that promise had been kept one small victory at a time. Jake's high school graduation day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect June morning that feels like a gift. I sat in the auditorium of his high school rhonda beside me, watching my son in his blue cap and gown approach the podium as valedictorian of his class. At 20, I had been changing diapers and working double shifts at the diner. At 36, I was watching my son address his graduating class, headed to Stanford, on a full scholarship to study biomedical engineering. The contrast was not lost on me. "First, I want to thank my mom." Jake began, his voice strong and clear over the microphone. "Most parents say they do anything for their children, but my mom actually did. She sacrificed everything to give me a good life. Mom, I owe everything I am to you." Tears blurred my vision as he continued his speech about perseverance and creating your own path. I'd completed my nurse practitioner program the previous year, specializing in pediatrics. Our lives were stable, comfortable even. The struggling teenage mother and her fatherless baby had defied every statistic, every doubt, every obstacle. A week after graduation, as Jake was packing for a pre-college summer program, our mailbox held a certified letter addressed to me. The return address made my blood run cold. Whitfield Daniels and Associates, attorneys at law. With shaking hands, I opened it in my kitchen, scanning the formal legal language with growing disbelief. My parents were suing for grandparent visitation rights to Jake. They claimed they had been wrongfully deprived of a relationship with their grandson and sought court-mandated regular visits and involvement in his life. The letter mentioned Jake's impressive academic achievements and promising future, as if these were the only qualities that made him worthy of their attention. Not once did it acknowledge their 2-decade absence or the pain they had caused. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands as rage, like I'd never known swept through me. After 20 years of silence, after throwing me out like garbage when I was 16 and pregnant, they wanted to claim my greatest achievement as their own. They wanted access to the child they had never once asked about, never sent a birthday card to, never acknowledged existed until he became someone they could be proud to claim. Mom, what's wrong? Jake stood in the doorway, concern etched on his face that looked so much like mine. I tried to compose myself. Nothing important, just some paperwork for work. But Jake knew me too well. He crossed the room and gently took the letter from my hands. I watched his expression change as he read confusion giving way to shock, then anger. These are my grandparents, the ones who threw you out, he asked, his voice quiet but tight with emotion. I nodded, unable to find words. And now they want to be part of my life after all this time. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never wanted you to deal with this. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. Why now? Why after all these years? I hesitated, then decided he deserved the full truth. Your graduation was in the local paper. The article mentioned your valedictorian status and Stanford scholarship. I think they suddenly realized their grandson was someone they could be proud of in their social circles. So if I hadn't gotten into Stanford, they wouldn't care about me. The hurt in his voice broke my heart. They care about appearances, Jake. They always have. When I got pregnant with you, I damaged their perfect image. Now you've accomplished something they can brag about, so they want back in. He was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. At 18, he was no longer a child I could shield from difficult realities. Do I have to meet them legally? No, I assured him. You're 18 now. You're an adult who can make your own decisions, and I'll fight this with everything I have. The next day, I consulted with a family law attorney, Catherine Reyes, who specialized in grandparent rights cases. She reviewed the letter and the attached legal filing with a frown. Fortunately, their case is weak, she explained. Grandparent visitation rights typically require either a pre-existing relationship or evidence that the parent is unfit. They have neither. You're a successful healthcare professional who raised an accomplished son, and they voluntarily severed contact for 2 decades. So they can't win? I asked, desperate for reassurance. I can't guarantee anything in family court, but this appears to be a case of entitlement rather than legal standing. We'll file a response detailing the abandonment and emphasizing Jake's age and wishes. What followed was a month of legal back and forth that added stress to what should have been a celebratory summer. I discovered through Catherine that my parents had been monitoring Jake's achievements online for years, collecting newspaper clippings about science fair wins and academic honors, creating a digital shrine to a grandson they had never met. Most disturbing was learning they had attempted to contact Jake directly through social media, sending messages my father had signed, "Your grandfather, Dr. Thomas Whitfield," as if his title would impress the boy he had rejected before birth. Jake had never received these messages, having deactivated his rarely used accounts when college applications began. But the invasion felt deeply violating, a reminder that the control my parents tried to exert over me now extended to my son. The court ordered a mediation session before proceeding further, which meant facing my parents for the first time in 20 years. I spent the night before in anxiety, wondering if I would crumble at the sight of them, if old wounds would reopen and leave me vulnerable. Jake insisted on accompanying me. They're trying to get access to me, he reasoned. The judge should hear directly from me that I don't want a relationship with them. Though I worried about exposing him to their toxicity, I respected his decision. At 18, he had the right to speak for himself about who would be in his life. Walking into the mediation room the next morning, I gripped Jake's hand for support. And then they were there, sitting across the table looking older, but unmistakably the parents who had locked their door against me. My father's hair had gone completely white, his face more lined, but still carrying that same expression of superiority. My mother had maintained her perfect appearance, though her face showed signs of cosmetic procedures attempting to halt time. They both stared at Jake with naked interest, taking in every detail of the grandson they had never known. "Sabrina," my father said stiffly, as if we had seen each other last week rather than 2 decades ago. "And this must be Jacob." "Jake," my son corrected immediately. "Only people I'm close to call me Jacob." The mediator, a calm woman named Ms. Patel, began by explaining the process. My parents' lawyer spoke first, outlining their desire for regular visitation and involvement in Jake's education and future. "Dr. and Mrs. Whitfield have been denied a relationship with their only grandson," the lawyer stated. "They wish to provide him with the benefits of their experience and connections as he begins his college career." When it was my turn to speak, I had prepared a statement with Catherine, but looking at my parents' entitled expressions, I set it aside and spoke from my heart. 20 years ago, these people threw me out of their home for choosing to have my son. I was 16 pregnant and suddenly homeless. Not once in the 2 decades since have they called, written, or attempted to help us. Not when Jake was born. Not when he was hospitalized with pneumonia as a baby. Not when I graduated nursing school or bought our first home. I looked directly at my parents for the first time. "You made your choice very clear that day. You chose your reputation over your daughter and grandson. Now that he's successful in ways you approve of, you want to claim him as yours. But you didn't do the work. You didn't stay up with him when he had fevers, or help him with science projects, or attend a single school event. You don't get to show up now and demand access to the wonderful person he's become without you." My mother spoke for the first time, her voice brittle. "We made it clear you could return if you made the appropriate decision. You chose to keep the pregnancy against our advice." "Against your ultimatum, you mean?" I corrected. "And yes, I chose my son. Every single day for the past 20 years, I've chosen him. Can you say the same?" Jake asked to speak next. With remarkable poise, he addressed the mediator and the lawyers rather than looking at his grandparents. "I'm 18 years old and about to start college. These people are strangers to me. They've never sent me a birthday card, never called, never shown any interest in my life until now. I don't want a relationship with people who threw my mother out when she was younger than I am now. I don't want to spend my time with people who only value academic achievements and social standing rather than character and compassion." He paused, then delivered the final blow. "And I legally changed my last name to Martinez last month in honor of Gina Martinez, who actually helped us when we needed it. I'm no longer a Whitfield by choice." This was news even to me. Jake had mentioned wanting to change his name, but I hadn't known he'd already done it. The look of shock on my parents' faces would have been satisfying if the whole situation weren't so painful. The mediation ended with no resolution pushing the case to a formal hearing. 2 weeks later, we sat in a family court as the judge reviewed all the evidence, including statements from Rhonda, Gina, and others who had been part of our support system over the years. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and penetrating eyes, addressed my parents directly in her ruling. "The court finds no compelling reason to grant visitation rights in this case. Dr. and Mrs. Whitfield voluntarily severed their relationship with both their daughter and grandson 20 years ago. They made no effort to maintain any contact during the child's formative years. The young man in question is now a legal adult who has clearly stated his wishes. This court will not force a relationship where none has existed by the grandparent's own choice." She looked at my parents over her glasses. "Grandparent rights exist to protect existing relationships that benefit the child, not to create relationships that serve the grandparent's desires." Petition denied. As we left the courthouse, an unexpected voice called my name. My sister Amelia stood near the entrance, looking uncertain. I hadn't seen her since that day in my bedroom when she refused to help me. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Just for a minute." Jake squeezed my hand. "I'll wait by the car, Mom." Amelia looked different than I remembered. Less polished, more authentic, somehow. "I've been trying to find you for years," she said. "But you changed your number and then your name, and—" "You could have tried harder," I replied. the hurt of her abandonment still raw. You knew where Diana lived. You could have asked at the hospital where Dad works. I know. I was a coward. She looked down at her hands. I went along with their version of events for too long. They told everyone you'd run off with some boy, that you'd chosen him over family. It took me years to realize how much they'd manipulated everything. Why now, Amelia? Because Jake's successful, because he got into Stanford. She shook her head. I left the practice 2 years ago. Dad and I had a falling out when I divorced Charles. Apparently, disappointing marriages are as unacceptable as teenage pregnancies in the Whitfield family. This surprised me. Last I knew, she had been following our father's footsteps, perfectly married to a surgeon her own age. I've been in therapy, she continued, working through a lot of things about our family. When I heard they were filing for grandparent rights, I knew I had to try again, to find you, to warn you. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. But looking at her, I saw something of myself, another woman who had been damaged by our parents' impossible standards. I'd like to get to know my nephew, she said tentatively. If you're both open to it. Not right away, but maybe someday. I have a daughter now, Sophie. She's 7. She should know her cousin. I took a deep breath. I can't promise anything, Amelia. We need time. I understand. Here's my number when you're ready. She handed me a card. I'm not them, Sabrina. I made terrible mistakes, but I want to make things right if I can. As she walked away, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't expected, the possibility of healing a part of my past I had thought permanently broken. That evening, Jake and I sat on our back porch swing, processing the events of the day. Cooper lay at our feet, occasionally nudging our hands for attention. Are you okay, Mom? Jake asked. I should be asking you that. I smiled, ruffling his hair like I used to when he was small. I'm fine. They're just people who happen to share DNA with us. They're not family. He was quiet for a moment. Are you going to call Aunt Amelia? Maybe, not right away. What do you think? He considered this seriously. I think second chances are important when people genuinely want to change. But you don't owe anyone forgiveness just because they're blood. I marveled at his wisdom, so beyond his years. When did you get so smart? I had a pretty great teacher. He grinned, bumping my shoulder with his. 2 months later, I stood in Jake's empty bedroom, the walls now bare of posters and awards. He had left for Stanford the day before, his car packed with essentials for his dorm room. Our goodbye had been tearful, but excited, the beginning of his journey rather than an ending. The house felt strangely quiet without his presence, but I felt a profound sense of accomplishment rather than loss. We had made it. Against every obstacle, every prediction, every statistic about teenage mothers and their children, we had not just survived, but thrived. In Jake's absence, I found myself returning to old passions. I enrolled in a community art class, picking up the sketchbook I had abandoned when life required more practical pursuits. I started a small foundation to support teenage parents, offering mentorship and resources I had lacked. And yes, I eventually called Amelia, beginning the slow, careful process of reconnecting with the one family member who showed genuine remorse. 20 years after being disowned for my pregnancy, I had built a life richer and more authentic than the one dictated by my parents' rigid expectations. Being thrown out had been painful beyond words, but it had also freed me to become who I truly was, rather than who they demanded I be. My story isn't one I would wish on anyone else. No child should be abandoned by their parents for making a difficult choice. No teenager should have to navigate pregnancy, education, and survival alone. But for those who find themselves walking a similar path, I want them to know that family is created through love and commitment, not just blood. That support can come from unexpected places when traditional sources fail. That a single choice made with love can lead to a life of purpose, even when the journey seems impossibly difficult. And most importantly, that being disowned by people who should love you unconditionally isn't the end of your story, but perhaps the beginning of one more authentic and brave than you ever imagined possible. What would you do if you were in my position? Would you have given your sister a second chance? Has anyone in your life ever tried to claim credit for your success after abandoning you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear. that life can be rebuilt even after complete rejection. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that family is defined by love, not blood.